Hello everyone, and welcome to another episode of My Collecting Journey, the series where I talk about my journey in collecting things. Specifically Blu-rays, but I might talk about other things, film related as well. And today I'm going to be talking about probably my favourite Criterion Blu-ray that I own, which is the Before Trilogy, written and directed by Richard Linklater and starring Ethan Hawke and Julie Delpy. Now, for those of you that may not have heard of the Before Trilogy, I will give you a very brief summary of what the films are and what they are overall going for. Basically, the whole idea of this trilogy is that it follows this couple every 10 years in their life, or at least we catch up with them every 10 years. That applies to both the real world and the characters in the movies. These movies were shot 10 years apart from each other, following the exact same characters 10 years on every time. The first one was Before Sunrise, released in 1995. The second one was Before Sunset, released in 2004. And the third one was Before Midnight, which was released in 2013. Now, I spent a whole day binge watching these, and I don't regret it, because I personally think watching all three of these movies in one go is probably the best way to watch it, because you very quickly get to know these characters by doing that, and also you get to see these characters grow. I mean, if you are someone who watched the original movie in 1995 and have watched each of the three movies the years they came out, so with 10 years apart from each other, then I can understand you also growing with the characters in that sense, because you have grown with the characters also. You've grown the same amount of time that the characters have in the movies. And in that sense, this is a really ambitious trilogy, and if they do a fourth one in, 2022, I will definitely be on board for that movie, and you can definitely expect a review of that when it comes out, if they do it. But yeah, it's one reason why I admire Richard Linklater as a filmmaker. He might not make constantly good movies. He's had a few missteps in his career, that's for sure. But I always admire him as a director because he's willing to do projects that take time and are a lot more ambitious than the average movie is. For example, you have this, and you also have Boyhood, which took 12 years to film, quite famously that is, and you also have movies like Waking Life and A Scanner Darkly, which use a very unique style of animation, which I think is like an over-the-top version of rotoscoping. So yeah, I do appreciate him as a filmmaker, even though not all of his films are really good. I always admire him as a filmmaker for what he is willing to try and do, even if that thing might not work to its full potential just yet. And personally, I think the Before Trilogy is Richard Linklater at his best. I've seen quite a few of his movies now, and I definitely can say with hand on heart that this is the best stuff I've seen from him. Now, before I talk about the Blu-ray itself and the packaging and the presentation, etc., I want to talk about the movies themselves individually. Starting off, of course, with Before Sunrise. And I absolutely adore this movie. I don't quite know what else to say. It's just so good. I didn't know what I was getting into the first time I saw it, but by the time it was finished, I had completely fallen in love with the movie and the characters and just everything that this movie was trying to pull off. And I think the reason why I love it so much, and why a lot of other people love this movie so much, is because it feels very realistic and natural. The whole movie is kind of springboarded off of a sense of spontaneity, and throughout the whole movie there is just this genuine and spontaneous feel to it that very few movies are able to capture as well as this movie does, especially romantic dramas such as this. I feel like when movies try and do this, it can 9 out of 10 times feel very forced, and they are just doing this for the sake of the script. But this movie just feels very in the moment, and everything feels very natural, to the point where these do genuinely feel like two ordinary people spending a night together in Vienna. And it is just so lovely to see these characters connect and grow over the course of this movie. And by the time the movie was finished and they had to go their own separate ways, I felt really emotional, and more emotional than I was expecting to feel. And I genuinely didn't want to see these two characters go their own ways. I wanted them to spend more time together and carry on the rest of their lives together. But unfortunately, at the end of the movie, they do go their own separate ways, like you are expecting them to, and it is really sad to see. But yeah, I adore this movie. The script is brilliant. The two performances from Ethan Hawke and Julie Delpy are fantastic, and they just rattle Richard Linklater's script off as if it's genuine, actual dialogue. Nothing feels scripted. Nothing feels rehearsed. It just feels so natural, as if these are just two ordinary people going about a night in Vienna, and I just love that about this movie, and that's why it is my favourite in the trilogy. I do like the other two a lot, but I just feel like the first movie, because of its sense of spontaneity, in the moment realism, and its genuinely natural feel, that I just think it has kind of one up over the other two movies, which are good, like I said, but kind of lack that sense of in the moment feel that the first movie has, which moves very swiftly on to Before Sunset, which is the second movie. And I didn't quite know where this movie was going to go in compared to the first one. And for the most part, I quite liked what this movie did. I, again, like the two lead performances, I like the script, and I like the fact that this movie, as well as Before Midnight as well, just feels like you're catching up with these people, and you're catching up the same way you would a best friend. You know, you haven't seen your friend in years, but the conversation picks up exactly where you last left it because you are such good friends. And that's kind of what this movie feels like. There is a bit of tension between the two, for various reasons, and that is understandable. And I do like that, but considering how in love they were in the first movie, it kind of broke my heart to see them fighting in this film. They don't fight that much, especially compared to Before Midnight, but it was just very interesting to see that direction play out throughout this film. And yeah, Before Sunset is pretty good. It's probably my second favourite in the trilogy. And yeah, it is pretty good. The one thing I wasn't that keen, though, is how abrupt the ending was. I know it kind of leaves a lot of ambiguity to what they may or may not do. But yeah, I just wasn't a big fan of how just abrupt it ended. I was expecting it to carry on for another 20 or 30 minutes, but it just cuts to black and it ends. But that being said, though, that does lead on to the final movie at this moment in time, which is Before Midnight. This is probably my least favourite out of the three, but that being said, it is still a very good movie. I do think this is the best shot of the trilogy, and that might have something to do with the more modern cameras, etc., and all that. But yeah, this movie is good, is very good, and like I said a minute ago, this is the one where they now are a fully fledged couple, compared to the last two where you didn't quite know whether they were going to carry on as a couple or even be a couple in the first place. But in this movie, they are a full-on couple with kids, spending a few weeks, or I think it's a month or so, in Greece due to some writing thing that Jesse has to do. But yeah, I do like this movie, and there are a few scenes in particular that really do stand out as really, really good scenes. Specifically, the argument in the hotel bedroom I thought was very well executed, and plays out a lot more like an ordinary argument between a couple rather than the very Hollywoodized, oh, let's just keep increasing the anger and intensity of the two actors to make it more dramatic. This argument in this movie feels a lot more realistic, because there are some bits where the argument reaches an intense point, but then it dies down and then gets more intense and then dies down again. And there's a good back and forth between that whole thing. There are also some scenes earlier on in the movie that I thought were quite good and brought back a little bit of that spark from the first two movies. You know, they might be older, they might be... maybe that spark isn't there between them as the same way that it used to be, especially in the first movie. But there are a couple of moments where they are just walking around Greece and that spark ever so slightly shows itself yet again, and you start to see the reason they fell for each other in the first place. And I just really liked those tiny moments throughout this film. So that's my thought on the trilogy as a whole. In terms of the Blu-ray, I really like the presentation of this thing. I mean, it's Criterion. You can't go wrong with Criterion. It's simple but effective. I love the whole watercolor aesthetic of this package, especially considering that the front cover does reflect the whole before sunset and before sunrise thing. You know, it looks like a sun setting or rising, and yeah, I do really like that about this box set. I also like the individual sleeves for each of the movies. Really like that. Yeah, it's just, again, simple but effective. Yeah, I like the whole insides. Really fits each style for each movie, and like I said before, the whole color palette for each film just works. You've got the pale white against the orange, which works for the first movie. Then you've got a slightly darker orange for the second, and just blue for the third one because, you know, midnight. And I just like the different colours for each one. Not the fact that they've stuck with a colour for the whole thing, the fact that they've given each movie a distinct colour, kind of reminiscing the poster and also the locations and feel of each individual movie. There's also this really fascinating little booklet which has the credits for each of the movie, as well as this essay called Time Regained by Dennis Lim. There's the first bit of it, which I think takes up most of the booklet, I think. Yeah, it takes up a good quantity of the booklet. And it basically just analyzes the three movies and how it very realistically captures a relationship over a 30-year period very authentically, as well as other things as well. He doesn't just talk about that, he also talks about other aspects of the movie as well. But yeah, this is a very fascinating little read if you are into the movies, which of course I am. There are also special features on the Blu-rays themselves. There's loads on each one, too many to mention at this point. The quality of the films themselves on the Blu-rays, they're brilliant. I mean, it's Criterion. They deliver the best quality sound video you can possibly get for any movie, so of course it's going to be good. But yeah, as I said before, this is my favourite Criterion Blu-ray that I own. And this is also probably, these three movies put together are probably my favourite things that Richard Linklater has ever made. I love Boyhood. School of Rock is also really good as well. But yeah, this is probably my favourite thing that he's ever done, just because it feels the most concise, but also feels the most real in terms of what he's trying to capture in these movies. And yeah, I really like them. And I hope you do too. If you've seen the Before Trilogy, or if you own this box set, please let me know what you think about it in the comments below. I'd love to know what you guys think about it. If we just have a general conversation about the Before Trilogy in the comments, that would be fantastic. But yeah, if you guys like this video, then give it a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already. Bye.